For nearly 13 years, Eleanor Hastings had been the immovable pillar of the Hastings name. Refined, strategic, and always composed. She wasn't just the wife of corporate mogul Gregory Hastings. She was the one who had built the social architecture that allowed his empire to thrive. Gala circuits, boardroom alliances, silent corrections behind the scenes. She had played them all with the skill of a diplomat and the patience of a chess master. But Gregory mistook her stillness for submission. So when he walked into their family's most exclusive annual gathering with a pregnant stranger on his arm, confident and smiling, he thought he was detonating a surprise bomb. What he didn't realize was, Eleanor had already constructed the fallout shelter. The venue for the evening was the Horizon Club, a glass and steel structure perched atop the city's skyline, reserved for events that whispered generational wealth. Inside its gold-veined marble atrium, on the 52nd floor, was a private chamber simply called the Observatory. It wasn't just a dining room. It was where power consolidated itself under chandeliers and crisp linens. That evening, the Hastings legacy would either be reinforced or fractured, and Eleanor planned to be the architect of whichever outcome took hold. She stood beneath a sculptural light fixture that resembled frozen lightning, her emerald gown falling like silk over marble. Her heels were soundless, her gestures minimal, but everything about her was calculated. The barely there perfume, the minimalist diamond pendant, the seating chart with names placed to fuel silent alliances and mild rivalries. She adjusted a menu card, nodded to the head waiter, and quietly whispered, "Dim the back wall sconces just a shade." Gregory's pupils dilate in low light. He gets reactive when they don't. The maitre d' nodded with respect. "Yes, Mrs. Hastings," and set the thermostat to 73. Anything cooler and the Westbridge investors will start fanning themselves. Her daughter, Tessa, entered moments later, the slit of her velvet dress swaying gently as she walked. "You've staged this like a courtroom," she said, arching an eyebrow. "You're expecting war?" Eleanor didn't look up. "I'm expecting optics, which matter more than facts in this family." Trailing behind came her son, Oliver, tall, composed, with a gaze that always measured the room before entering. "Dearie, board members are finishing cocktails downstairs," he said, checking his phone. "Dad's driver says they're 5 minutes out." Eleanor gave a quiet nod. "Good. Inform security to hold the press outside the valet area. No cameras. Past the glass vestibule. And we're still keeping things off business?" Oliver asked. "Let your father think it's his show," Eleanor replied. "Our job is to keep the room breathing." Before either child could say more, the massive glass doors to the chamber parted slowly. Entering with her cane tapping in, rhythm was Margaret Hastings, matriarch, founder's widow, and a presence that bent steel with a glance. In her ivory blouse and navy silk pantsuit, she looked less like someone attending a dinner and more like someone expected to judge one. Eleanor greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "Mother Hastings." "Eleanor," Margaret said coolly. "I assume the proceedings are to standard?" "Every detail," Eleanor replied. Margaret checked her platinum watch. "Gregory is late. He's en route," Eleanor said calmly. "Jonathan never arrived late," she muttered. Jonathan being Gregory's father and the one who had set the Empire's standards with an iron spine. Being late is a message, one that says, "I matter more than the room." Eleanor simply smiled. "Then we'll let the room respond in kind." By 7:10 p.m., every chair had been filled, except two. One at the head of the long table, and another directly to its right. The air hung with the subtle tension of withheld breath. These were not people who welcomed the unexpected. "Start drinks," Eleanor instructed softly. The sound of crystal against crystal had barely begun when the entry doors swung wide. Gregory strode in. Sharp suit, sculpted smile, air of invincibility. But the oxygen in the room vanished not because of him, but because of who accompanied him. She looked young, late 20s maybe. Her figure was unmistakably pregnant, 5 or 6 months along. She wore a crimson gown that hugged every contour, as if she wasn't hiding the pregnancy, but flaunting it. Her sleek auburn hair fell in gentle waves, and her lips were painted like she'd come prepared for battle. Her name, unknown to most in the room, was Lila Monroe. "Good evening," Gregory said, his voice smooth like aged bourbon. "Sorry we're late. Everyone, this is Lila, our Director of Emerging Markets, and the future mother of my son." Gasps were swallowed. Forks froze mid-air. No one looked at Gregory. Every eye turned to Eleanor. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She walked toward Lila, not stiffly but like a breeze carried her, and extended a hand with a warm, unreadable smile. "Welcome, Lila. We've been expecting you," she said. "The seat next to mine is open." Gregory's confident posture faltered slightly. Lila blinked, unsure, but followed Eleanor's lead to the seat. The chaos he had hoped to unleash? Nowhere in sight. "She took that better than I thought," Lila whispered to Gregory. "She's in shock," he murmured back. "Trust me, it's coming." But it wasn't, because Eleanor wasn't surprised. She was ready. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us keep making stories like this. At the far end, Margaret Hastings gave Eleanor a long, almost amused glance, as if sensing a storm rising beneath still waters. Eleanor caught it and held her gaze. Dinner had just begun. But the reckoning? That was right on schedule. The opening course arrived. Beet carpaccio with citrus glaze. But barely anyone touched it. All eyes subtly tracked the strange equilibrium forming at the head of the table. Eleanor sat tall, hands composed, conversing casually with Lila. Not interrogation, not passive aggression, actual conversation. Gregory tried inserting himself, but his words hung strangely in the air as though no one quite heard them. "So," Eleanor said, her voice lightly curious, "what led you into emerging markets? It's not a common path." Lila, blinking as if unsure whether this was bait or kindness, answered cautiously, "I've always liked complexity. Emerging markets aren't about quick wins. They're about groundwork, reading culture." Eleanor nodded. "I imagine you're familiar with our East African logistics expansion then?" "I've read the reports," Lila said, "but I had no idea how involved you were in that." Eleanor smiled lightly. "I was the one who drew up the first memorandum of intent. Gregory handled press. I handled the ports." A beat of silence. A few board members shifted in their seats. Even Margaret paused mid-sip. Gregory adjusted in his chair. "We brought Lila in to strengthen our global efforts. Her instincts are invaluable." "And it's clear she's made an impression," Eleanor replied gently. "You're about 6 months along, yes?" Lila hesitated. "Almost 7. "Congratulations," Eleanor said smoothly. "And thank you for being here tonight. This family isn't easy to walk into." Gregory tried to pivot the attention. "We should probably move into discussing projections for next quarter." Eleanor lifted a finger slightly. "In a moment. But first, something more pressing." She set her fork down and folded her hands. "You introduced Lila as the mother of your son. That has personal implications for everyone in this room." Gregory's eyes flickered. "We're keeping this civil, Eleanor." "I am," she said. "I'm simply seeking clarity. Since succession has always been a point of discussion, where does that leave Tessa and Oliver?" The room stilled. Even Lila's expression tightened. "They have their own pursuits," Gregory replied, brushing it off. "Oliver's working with green energy startups. Tessa has her own non-profit. I've always supported their independence." "So, no stake in the company?" Eleanor asked softly. "No role in leadership?" Gregory hesitated. "Fresh blood can be healthy for an old structure." Eleanor turned slightly toward Lila. "And will you be joining Gregory in investor summits and executive retreats?" "I hadn't thought about it," Lila replied, voice lower. "He invited me tonight. I assumed it was just, she's, not trying to replace anyone." Gregory cut in. "This isn't some hostile takeover." "No," Eleanor agreed. "But it's important to understand what story we're telling and who writes it." Gregory leaned in, his voice dropping. "Eleanor, this doesn't need to become messy. You'll be taken care of, the estate in Vermont, the Manhattan apartment, and your board stipend. It's all secured. Eleanor tilted her head, a slow smile growing. How generous. But what? I want isn't on any of your ledgers. Gregory raised an eyebrow. I want transparency, she said, about the shell companies in the Caymans, about the wire transfers linked to Monroe Trade Holdings, about the restructuring budget quietly redirected to a firm in Lila's name. Lila's head snapped toward him. You used my name on those documents? Gregory's mouth opened, but no sound came. That's when a quiet shuffle echoed from the side door. Eleanor's assistant entered and began distributing thick binders, one to each board member. No announcement, no dramatics, just quiet, methodical placement. Gregory stood. What is this? Eleanor met his gaze. An audit, conducted independently, showing corporate funds used to float non-disclosed entities and fund luxury assets. Assets you listed under Monroe Holdings. Margaret opened her copy and adjusted her glasses. These signatures, Gregory, did you falsify approvals? I didn't falsify anything, Gregory barked. Those were strategic consolidations. Without board consent? Asked Oliver. Without spousal consent, Eleanor added, which per Hastings International bylaws invalidates any trust restructuring post-2018. Gregory's knuckles whitened around his chair. You've been planning this. No, Eleanor said calmly. I've been protecting this, from the moment you began thinking you could lead without me. Lila, now visibly pale, set her utensils down. You told me I'd never be dragged into this, that it was handled. And I believed her, Eleanor replied, until I saw what you were part of, whether willingly or not. Gregory stepped back, exasperated. You're just bitter. Eleanor gave a tiny shake of her head. I'm just finished. She retrieved a smaller folder and handed it directly to Gregory. It's a formal separation agreement, including clauses that protect the brand, the children, the staff, and yes, you. Sign it, and this stays in-house. Decline, and the SEC sees what's in that binder tomorrow. Gregory's voice rose. You can't erase me from my own company. No, Eleanor said, but I can make sure your damage ends here. At that moment, even the waitstaff paused. The air in the observatory had shifted entirely. Gregory's grand entrance had turned into a quiet exit. Not by force, by facts, a few bored. Members nodded to one another. Margaret set down her glass and finally spoke. Your father left this company in Eleanor's hands long before he left it in yours. You just never noticed. Gregory stared at her, stunned. And that, Margaret added, was your greatest failure. He stormed out. The double doors swung. Behind him, like the final chords of a closing act, the moment Gregory's footsteps faded down the hallway, a silence hovered like dew on glass, fragile, reflective, but not mournful. Eleanor didn't sigh. She didn't gloat. She simply adjusted the cuff of her gown, lifted her glass, and sipped her water as if all she'd done was shift a misplaced centerpiece. Resume service, she said quietly, and the staff moved, almost in relief, bringing out the next course. At the far end of the table, Tessa leaned toward Oliver. She didn't even raise her voice. She didn't have to, he murmured. She spoke with evidence, not emotion. Across from them, Margaret observed Eleanor with an expression bordering on reverence. She had seen power displays before, loud, aggressive, theatrical. This was power in its most dangerous form, prepared, patient, quiet. Meanwhile, Lila remained seated, her hands still folded in her lap, a faint tremble in her shoulders. She looked not at the exit, but at Eleanor, unsure of what came next, unsure if she was allowed to stay. Eleanor turned slightly to her. You weren't the deception, Lila. You were the excuse. That's an important difference. I didn't know what he was hiding, Lila said softly. I didn't even know about most of those accounts. He told me I'd never be involved. Eleanor's gaze softened. You're involved now, and what you choose from here matters. Lila's eyes glistened. I don't want a life built on lies. Then don't live in one, Eleanor said not unkindly. Start over. Make something. That won't fall apart when the truth shows up. Before Lila could respond, a staff member arrived with Eleanor's assistant, whispering discreetly. Eleanor nodded once, stood, and tapped the edge of her glass. If I may, she said, capturing the room without effort. There's one final matter. A few board members stiffened, likely assuming another bombshell was coming. But Eleanor's tone remained composed. This is a transition, not a demolition. Gregory's exit is being handled within legal channels, and his rights, as defined by company structure, remain protected. However, moving forward, Hastings International will restructure its executive leadership, not just to survive scandal, but to evolve from it. She gestured gently to Oliver. Our next summit will include a presentation on his sustainability integration model, a plan we hope to align with new ethical business standards globally. She then nodded toward Tessa. And we'll be initiating a philanthropy division, built not on photo ops, but long-term community-anchored partnerships, under Tessa's leadership. Gasps of surprise turned into murmurs of approval. Board members exchanged glances that carried more respect than curiosity. Eleanor continued, In addition, I'll be leading a new mentorship fellowship designed for young women in business, those who are often seen but not heard. That ends now, someone clapped, then another. Then slowly the whole table applauded. Just then Lila stood, slowly, cautiously, and addressed the room. I'd like to say something. All eyes turned. I know I wasn't invited into this family the right way. I was used as leverage in someone else's agenda, but I take responsibility for showing up here tonight, even if I didn't know the full story. And if it means anything, I'm leaving the company. I've accepted a role with a new firm overseas, one where I can start clean, where my name means something on its own. A long beat passed. Then Eleanor nodded. That's wise. Also want to thank you, Lila added, looking at her directly. You didn't humiliate me. You could have, and maybe no one would have blamed you. But you chose dignity over vengeance. That taught me more than Gregory ever did. Eleanor stepped forward and handed Lila a small velvet pouch. A keepsake, she said. It's the new crest we're designing for the next generation of Hastings. It doesn't come with entitlement. It comes with responsibility. Lila accepted it with shaking hands. Thank you, she whispered. Later that evening, after most of the guests had filtered out into the velvet night and the boardroom air had lost its edge, Eleanor remained behind. The dining room had been cleared. The linen crisp again, the glasses reset for the next day's event. She stood at the panoramic window, gazing at the city below, not with triumph but with stillness. The lights blinked far away like distant affirmations. She had not set out to burn the empire down. She had simply refused to let it rot from within. Behind her, Tessa approached quietly, holding 2 glasses of wine. You don't have to stay behind and supervise, she said. This place runs itself after dark. Eleanor smiled slightly, accepting 1 glass. Places run themselves, but transitions, those require presence. Tessa joined her by the window. You didn't just manage the fallout tonight, you changed the entire room. I didn't do it alone, Eleanor replied. I had a team. I had both of you. And I had time. From the far end of the hall, Oliver joined them, carrying a folded binder. Legal reviewed the separation documents. It's ironclad. Gregory's out. Full severance, but no vote. No seat. Eleanor nodded. Good. The family stays intact. The company moves forward. Oliver hesitated. Are you sure you want to keep the Hastings name? You could rebrand. Make a clean break. She turned to him fully. We don't abandon names. We redefine them. Tessa raised her glass. To legacy. No, Eleanor said gently. To earned legacy. They clinked their glasses and drank, not for celebration, but for clarity. The following morning, news of the transition made its way through industry networks, but not in the way Gregory would have anticipated. No tabloids, no scandals, Just a controlled statement released by Hastings International's corporate office. Leadership realignment for strategic growth. Accompanying it was a profile photograph, not of Eleanor alone, but of the new leadership team, including Oliver, Tessa, and several rising department heads. The caption below read, "Built by many, led with purpose." Back in the office, Eleanor moved with quiet efficiency. Meetings flowed seamlessly. Her assistant, Kara, handed her a stack of messages. "You've got interview requests from 3 major outlets. They want your side of the story." "No story," Eleanor replied. "Just tell them the company is moving forward." "What about the gala next month, the Langston?" "Rename it," Eleanor said. "It's now the Hastings Foundation Summit. No black tie, no red carpet. Purpose-driven only." Kara raised her eyebrows. "That's going to ruffle feathers." "Then, let them be ruffled," Eleanor replied, her voice light but firm. At noon, she stepped into the design floor, a space she rarely visited, but one she wanted to see up close now. Designers paused when they noticed her. She walked slowly, examining sketches, digital mock-ups, talking with interns and managers alike. No speech, no cameras, just quiet observation. An intern, nervous but bold, asked her, "Why are you down here?" Eleanor smiled. "Because I can't lead a company I haven't walked through, and because no one's job here is invisible." The intern smiled back, emboldened. That afternoon, a small envelope arrived on Eleanor's desk. No return name, just an embossed seal. Inside was a handwritten letter from Lila. "Thank you for giving me space to choose differently. I leave next Friday for my new post. It's a role I earned with words, not association. Lucas is due in 2 months. I hope he grows up with even a fraction of your clarity." Attached was a printed sonogram and a note scribbled at the bottom. "He already kicks like his father, but I hope he leads like you." Eleanor placed the note in a drawer. Not on display. Not yet. But safe. By the end of the week, the energy across Hastings International had shifted in ways subtle but undeniable. The executive floors, once hushed and rigid, now buzzed with cautious optimism. Eleanor had removed the private elevator access to the top floor, insisting all senior leaders walk through the main levels at least twice a day. "Visibility builds accountability," she told them during the first full leadership meeting under her interim term. "If you can't look the staff in the eye, you're not fit to guide them." A few grumbled, but most understood. The culture of distance had been broken, not with a hammer, but with persistent, quiet restructuring. Eleanor's next major step was reintroducing transparency. She commissioned a series of internal town halls, open to every department regardless of rank. No rehearsed speeches, no anonymous surveys, just face-to-face dialogue and live Q&A. Her presence at the first session stunned many, not because she showed up, but because she stayed the entire time, listening to concerns about outdated software, toxic team leads, and overlooked overtime. Policies. One employee from shipping logistics spoke with quiet frustration about how supply errors were always blamed on the floor staff, while executives rarely checked the system logs. Eleanor didn't promise to fix it overnight. She simply said that shouldn't have gone unaddressed this long. It won't again. Meanwhile, word spread in the press that Gregory had formally signed the separation agreement, avoiding litigation, but forfeiting his seat and stake. A few financial outlets speculated on his next move, but most commentary focused on Eleanor's leadership. Headlines ranged from "The Hastings Phoenix Rises Quietly" to "Eleanor Hastings, the strategist no one saw coming." She granted no interviews, made no statements. "Let our work speak," she told the PR team, and it did. Internal satisfaction reports rose. Vendors began negotiating without hesitation. Clients who had been wary called back with renewed interest. Some sent flowers. A week later, Ava sent another update from Hong Kong. A photo showed Lucas asleep in her arms during a strategy meeting, with a caption that simply said, "He sleeps through budget reviews." A future CEO, obviously. Eleanor smiled. not out of sentimentality but a quiet, deep-rooted sense that the company, and the people touched by it, were finally finding balance. That same evening, Eleanor returned to the family estate, where Margaret awaited her on the terrace with 2 glasses of sherry and the faint sound of jazz humming from the interior speakers. Margaret didn't offer a toast. She simply handed Eleanor a file, one Gregory had never known about. It contained letters written by Jonathan Hastings, some addressed to Margaret, others to future leadership. One, dated a year before his death, was addressed directly to Eleanor. "If you're reading this," it began, "it means the day finally came when you had to choose between protecting the name and preserving its meaning. I've never doubted you'd do the harder thing." There was no grand revelation in the letter, just validation, the kind Eleanor had never sought but finally received. She folded the letter gently and tucked it into her bag. Later, after Margaret had gone to bed, Eleanor stood alone in the estate's old library, a room lined with first editions, personal ledgers, and decades of family history. On the central wall hung an oil painting of Jonathan shaking hands with a prime minister. Beside it, until recently, had been Gregory's corporate portrait, removed quietly earlier that week. In its place now stood a modern photograph, a candid black and white image of Eleanor walking alongside Tessa and Oliver through the design floor, surrounded by staff. The lighting wasn't posed, the clothes weren't formal, but the message was clear: leadership by proximity, not pedestal. Spring emerged with cool mornings and soft light filtering through the glass walls of Hastings International, bringing with it a new rhythm across the company. Eleanor moved, with quiet purpose, balancing transition with transformation. The board had already held preliminary votes affirming her as the permanent CEO, and while the final decision was scheduled for the following month, there was no more resistance. Not from the investors, not from the press, and certainly not from the employees who now passed her in the hallways with lifted chins and grateful nods. She had shifted not just operations but culture, creating a place where people no longer walked on glass but stood on solid ground. In early April, Eleanor hosted a roundtable at the company's new Midtown Innovation Hub. Unlike previous leadership summits, this one included partners from their philanthropy arm, small business collaborators, and even 2 former competitors turned allies. Among the attendees was a representative from Ava's team in Hong Kong, who delivered updates on the expansion efforts. 3 new contracts signed, 2 more in negotiation, and an operational model being praised for its regional customization. Eleanor listened carefully, then offered one simple note: let's not grow just to grow. Let's deepen as we expand. That night, Eleanor returned home later than usual. She found Tessa waiting at the kitchen counter, flipping through sketches for her latest community art initiative. They spoke for an hour over tea, not as CEO and director, but as mother and daughter. Tessa admitted, "For a while I thought you stayed in Dad's shadow because it was easier, but now I see it wasn't shadow, it was strategy." Eleanor gave a small smile, brushing a loose strand from Tessa's cheek. Sometimes power isn't stepping forward, it's holding still long enough for others to reveal themselves. A few days later, a package arrived at Eleanor's office, a small wooden box wrapped in cloth, accompanied by a letter in Ava's handwriting. Inside was a delicate bracelet, woven from red silk and gold thread, a traditional Hong Kong gift given to those who help usher in new beginnings. The note read, "For protecting what mattered, and for giving me the chance to protect it too. Lucas is thriving. He took his first steps last week, toward me, but in spirit, toward you." Eleanor read it twice, then gently placed the bracelet in a glass keepsake box beside her desk. Not hidden, but not broadcast either, just where it belonged. The month closed with a quiet visit to a local school, part of Hastings Foundation's new youth leadership program. Eleanor watched as teenagers presented their micro-entrepreneurship projects with more confidence than some of the executives she'd once worked beside. One girl, no older than 17, pitched a sustainability app designed to connect low-income families to eco-friendly suppliers, When she asked Eleanor if she thought it could scale, Eleanor replied, "It already has, in your belief." That evening, Eleanor sat by the riverwalk, alone with a notebook and a pen. She didn't write business strategy or financial goals. She wrote one line and circled it twice. Legacy isn't handed down. It's made every day in silence and in strength. She closed the notebook, looked out across the water, and exhaled. She hadn't just weathered a storm. She'd redrawn the entire coastline and built something meant to last. The summer sun arrived like a quiet celebration, flooding the upper floors of Hastings International with a soft golden hue. By then, Eleanor Hastings had been unanimously confirmed as the official CEO. There was no ceremony, no grand reveal, just a simple email sent out to the global staff. Leadership transition finalized. The future begins together. Attached was a photo, not of Eleanor alone, but of the new executive team standing shoulder to shoulder. No titles, no rankings, just names, faces, and commitment. At the bottom of the message, in her own words, she had written, "We are no longer maintaining a legacy. We are redefining one." Outside the spotlight, Gregory remained silent. He had relocated to a private estate in the south of France, surrounded by silence, his name now absent from boardrooms and brand initiatives. No lawsuits had followed, no official scandals had broken in the press. But everyone in the industry understood. He had been quietly erased by a woman who never raised her voice, never threatened a headline, but instead dismantled him with truth and timing. And even that act, Eleanor never treated as vengeance. She treated it as necessary stewardship. Back in New York, Ava returned briefly with baby Lucas for a quiet visit. She met Eleanor in the new Foundation Lounge, a warm, inviting space with open seating, bookshelves filled with stories of resilience, and large prints of youth submitted. Photography on the walls. Lucas, now giggling and crawling fast, pulled himself up using Eleanor's chair and let out a delighted shout. "He's been doing that all week," Ava laughed. "Wants to stand even when he's not ready to walk." Eleanor smiled down at him. "That's how you learn balance." They sat together, not as rivals, not even as distant branches of a complicated family tree, but as women who had once been tied to the same storm and had chosen, in their own ways, to walk out of it better, not bitter. "I've accepted a teaching offer," Ava said after a pause. "Strategic leadership, part-time. I think I want to build instead of chase for a while." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "That's still leading. Sometimes more than anything else." Before leaving, Ava handed her a photograph, Lucas standing on his own, holding the silk bracelet Eleanor had once received, now tied loosely around his wrist. "He won't know the full story," Ava said, "but he'll know strength when he sees it." As they parted, Eleanor placed the photo on her shelf, beside her father-in-law's original company charter and a framed print of the company's new mission statement. Not for display, but for grounding. Weeks passed. Then, the Hastings Foundation Summit returned again, not in glitz, but in purpose. It had become one of the few annual events where suits, sneakers, artists, and engineers shared space equally. This time, Tessa curated the central exhibition, Work in Progress, a digital installation showcasing stories of growth after failure. Meanwhile, Oliver launched a pilot program integrating green infrastructure into the company's logistics chain, which drew praise from climate advocates and financial backers alike. They weren't just Eleanor's children anymore. They were leaders in their own right, growing out from the firm soil she had cultivated. On the final night of the summit, as guests mingled over local wines and rooftop jazz, Eleanor stood quietly, at the edge of the terrace, her gaze on the skyline that had once intimidated her. It didn't anymore. She felt a presence beside her. Margaret, now walking slower but still sharp as ever, joined her. "He would have been proud, you know," she said, her voice low. "Not just of what you built, but how you never asked for the credit and earned it anyway." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She watched the buildings glow like embers, then said softly, Maybe legacy isn't what they leave behind. Maybe it's how you carry what they couldn't. That night, she returned home and found a small envelope tucked under her door. It was from one of the company interns, a quiet young woman named Maris. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for proving that quiet doesn't mean weak. I used to think I had to be loud to lead, but now I see there's another way." Eleanor folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, on top of Ava's photo and her father-in-law's letter. Then she turned out the light. The next morning, she walked into the office at 7:00 a.m. sharp, just as she always had. Coffee in hand, no entourage, no announcement, just presence. She passed by the atrium, where a new plaque had just been installed. It bore the names of everyone who had served in leadership over the past 50 years. At the very bottom was her name, not at the top, not in bold, but placed where it belonged, steady, earned, and quietly enduring. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and let us know your favorite moment in the comments.